can I make my work accessible and why? So we're going to be talking about not just about the theory about it, not just about the lawsuits, but we're going to talk about the people that this affects, because there are some people in my life that this affects, definitely, making digital experiences accessible. And we're also going to give code examples. And we're going to show examples from a new website that I created called Enable. It definitely will have examples of common components that you can use in your own projects. Either you can use those examples directly, or you can use them as a model to base your own components on, or make components that you already have accessible. So when I talk about accessibility, a lot of people, they will think about this. They'll give me this look like it's the medicine that they don't want to have, right? It's the vegetables that they don't want to eat. I mean, I love Brussels sprouts personally, but a lot of people don't. I have no idea why. When I talk about accessibility, they think their websites have to look like the one that's on the screen, Craigslist, right? Which, I think everybody, even at Craigslist, will probably say that it's a very basic looking site and designed to be that way. But it's not an exciting website. And, we like to build great digital experiences. Well, I'm going to say this right now, and I'm going to give this an opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Zoltan Hoverluke, and I have been a web developer for a long time, as was said by Mr. Babian. And this is the second website I ever built back in '95 for Netcom Canada. The first one that I built predates the Internet Archive, so definitely that's how long I've been a web developer. So when we talk about great digital experiences, we talk about things that are not common, like things that are great to look at. So, like, for example, if I look at this demo that I did back in 2012, I believe it was, this is an example of how to use CSS transforms. And you'll notice that it follows a strict path. I made a tool that will allow you to use any polygon, and you could shape text into that polygon. It uses a lot of math. I don't want to get into it too much, but if you look at useragentman.com/matrix, you'll see the matrix construction set, and it'll show you how to build those kind of experiences. As I said, it uses a lot of math. I like to solve difficult problems. I have a mathematics background. I have a calligraphy background. I like doing great work. I also like to make sure I support as many browsers as possible, including elderly browsers. At the time when I built this, back in 2012, I believe it was, Internet Explorer 6 was still a thing, and everybody who is of my vintage will cringe at the hearing of that browser name. But this was actually able to be viewed with Internet Explorer 6 using a lot of complex math, and it didn't support CSS transforms. I took a lot of everything that I learned and put it on my blog, User Agent Man. I like to share the knowledge that I have with other people, especially things that haven't been done before. Because of the work that I've done on User Agent Man, I got a lot of kudos, which is great, from people like the Daniel Glasman from the CSS working group at the time. It was very great to hear from him about the kudos. I also have Paul Irish, a friend of mine, who on his blog post about developers we admire, he put a shout out to me, which was great. I mean, it's good to be recognized by peers. And I don't mention this stuff just to show off, it is kind of nice to have that kind of recognition. But my point is, I like to share work, and I like to be part of the community, and I like to give back to the community, and I like to solve hard problems so that I can give back to the community. That said, I want to talk about our company. And I want to talk about what is our primary job within Publicis Sapient. I know we are developers, we are designers, we are UX people, project managers. We're all these different types of roles, but each one of us, what is our primary job, regardless of what's on your business card? And I will say, our primary job is this. Our one job is to give our best work and our best advice to our clients. That's it. I mean, that's in a nutshell what we do. If we don't do that, we are not doing our job. They hire us to be experts in our field, no matter what our role is. So when you see a slide like this, when you see an article like this about Target, this happened about 2008. Target had to pay $6 million to settle an accessibility lawsuit. Now, the background to this is they built a website. They didn't realize that it was not accessible. People complained about it. They did nothing because they didn't think it was important. They didn't think a lot of people were going to be affected by it, and they were sued. And if they actually built the website accessible to begin with, it would have cost a mere small fraction of this, not $6 million, more, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of thousands. The point is they didn't have to spend years in court only to pay $6 million plus attorney fees for the other side, by the way, which I didn't mention here. And you might think, okay, this is something that's old news, but it happens all the time. Even last year, the Supreme Court denied listening to Domino's complaint about being sued over their app being inaccessible to order pizzas, and which basically said that, well, yes, you have to make your app accessible. Did these development shops give their best work? And did they give good advice to the clients? The people who built this stuff for Domino's and Target, I'm going to say no, they didn't. They didn't do that. That was not their best work and their best advice. And we should be doing better. We are very smart people in this company. All the presentations that we have seen today show that. And it's very well to sort of talk about accessibility from a very academic standpoint, but I want to give a few examples that are very current today. Like, first example, a COVID vaccine. Let's say it was discovered, and I'd love that to happen because I'm sick of being at home all the time. Now, you are told that you have 1 day to get inoculated because it goes bad very quickly, and you must get to a specific building, and no one can help you because social distancing. So let's think about that. And now think about this. You are in a wheelchair and this is the entrance. Reminder, no one can help you. Now, even if someone could help you, like if I was trying to push my father's wheelchair up this ramp, that would not work. I mean, I couldn't do it. It's pretty steep. I mean, I could probably do it, but I'd be worried about hurting him. This is not an accessible experience. And it's not just bad design. It's immoral. We are saying to people, you don't deserve to go into this building. You don't deserve a cure. You might not mean that because you might have done that by accident. You might not realize that that's not an accessible experience, but you're telling people that they don't matter, even though that's not what you intended to do. Now let's imagine this scenario, because that was a real world example. This is a digital example. You were forced to stay home during the global pandemic, and the only way to get groceries is via the web. The grocery store that you have that you need items from has an inaccessible website. Now, this might seem like academic, but this happens all the time right now. There's a lot of people, vulnerable people, who don't want to get sick. They're more likely to get sick, and they can't get the groceries they need because the website that they need to get that stuff is inaccessible. And when we accidentally and unintentionally make an inaccessible web experience, we give the wrong impression. We're a marketing communications company, partly we're also, a technology company, but we do marketing communications. The message is very important. Now, I'm going to show a next slide. This is a very strong slide. It shows about perception, and the intent of what the person's doing in the next slide is not our intent, but the message we inadvertently give might be like this. Now, again, the woman in this slide is trying to exclude people from her business because she doesn't like them, because they're Japanese. This was from the 1950s, if I remember correctly. If we make an inaccessible website that's not usable by people with disabilities, we are telling them that they're not welcome. That's an awful message, an awful story. If we're talking about storyscaping, horrible message to give to our customers or the client's customers. Now, you might think a lot of people are not affected by the choices that we make in terms of making things accessible or spending time to make things accessible or learning about accessibility. But I will show you the top here is the US population. That is over 300,000 people. But if you look at the amount of people in Canada versus the number of people in the United States with a web impacting disability, they're about the same. That's a nation's worth of people, 35 million people. That's not good. And the thing is, as well, like that population will sue people who make inaccessible websites. They won't say thank you. Like, well, Canadian people, people with disabilities will also be angry about this. It's not something that is unique to the United States. But we talked a lot about these examples, but I want to talk about who the people we're talking about that will be affected by this, because it's very important to understand who they are. And I have two people very close to me who are affected by the decisions that we make when we make inaccessible experiences. My parents. This is them in the 1960s, as you can see, like from the Beehive, which I love. This is them today. They're in their 80s. My father was an artist. He looks very much like the very emotional artist. You can see the paintings. He did a lot of nice oil painting work. This painting was actually done 10 years ago. And just after he did this painting that you see on the screen, he got something called macular degeneration. What macular degeneration does is it alters your vision. It warps your vision because it warps the surface of your eye. Your vision will be obscured partially and blurred partially. So obviously, when my father became visually impaired, it was very hard for him to use the internet. So being the good son who also has experience with accessible technology, I hooked him up with a screen reader, NVDA, for his Windows machine. I made sure that his mobile devices were set up with screen readers. I made sure that he had a Google Home so he can ask it questions without actually using a screen if he didn't need to. Also, he's in a wheelchair. It allows him to turn on and off lights in the room without actually reaching over. We got him a reader for books so it can magnify books, like the one that you see here. And I taught him how to use features in his browser that are useful for him so that he can actually, because he could partially see, he could still read if things are blown up. So here's an example of a banking site. I'm not going to tell which banking site because a lot of banking sites do have the same issue. But if you actually use the text zooming feature of the browser, which is intended for people who are visually impaired to read the content on the screen, and for people like me who wear glasses, if you zoom just the text to 200%, this is what happens. Text gets cut off. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be that the text should grow without things getting hidden. This is actually a violation of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And if you are if you have a website, an existing website, and you're trying to fix this, it's hard. It's a hard problem to fix. But because I like solving difficult problems like having this work in IE6, I solved this for a client. Our client has images like this with copy on top. We want to make sure that the text can zoom as well. But when we found out when we zoomed the text, it was actually on top of the vehicles. So we didn't want that to happen because, and you probably were wondering, well, a person who's visually impaired, why would he care about driving? My father is visually impaired. He is the one who buys the cars that gets driven around in, and he wants to make sure it has good mileage. He has that right to know everything about the car, including the color, which he can see. So this is a WCAG violation. We wanted to fix it. I created a JavaScript library that basically is kind of like a media query for text zooming. So when text zooming occurs, it goes from this, and instead of seeing this, it will see this. The text goes below the image only when text is zoomed. And that's a much better experience. It's much more legible, despite everything that's blurred out because, client IPO. It was such an in my opinion, innovative solution. And I've never seen anybody do this before. I posted on my blog, User Agent Man, and I'll get back to User Agent Man in a minute. Another example of inaccessible experience that my parents have every once in a while, especially now during this pandemic. My mother was in the hospital, not from COVID-19. She had problems with her legs. She was in the hospital for 2.5 months. My father was very upset about that. We were able to communicate with her via FaceTime because the hospital offered that feature. Unfortunately, my mother is hearing impaired. She only has 20% of her hearing. The tablet that they were using was not set up very well, and she couldn't hear. The problem is a lot of video conferencing software has machine-generated captions. If you looked at Microsoft Teams, inside it actually has this feature. So does Google Meet, but the FaceTime doesn't. And there's no excuse for that, because like that software is like that technology is available today. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. We had to do this. I had to write notes on sheets of paper. It took me a while. Our conversations were dragged out a lot longer than they needed to because I had to write this stuff. I would say that, you know, a company as big as Apple should be able to build this feature into their messaging software. And you might think it might be very expensive. There are open source solutions that are like, there's at least 7 according to this article. I've seen some of these. They're easy to implement. We should be able to implement these for people who have web impacting disabilities. So I've talked a lot about people and ethics and a whole bunch of other things, but this is a technology conference. You're probably going to say, how can I do this? I want to do the right thing, Zoltan. I think that you're pretty cool with your nice fedora here. I want to be just like you. How can I make accessible websites? Well, that's where Enable comes in. I want everyone to be an ally with Enable. And if you have never seen that acronym before, ally is basically an A with 11 characters after it with a Y, which is the word accessibility. We have in the Enable library a whole bunch of different examples that are accessible that you can actually use on their own, or you can use them as models for the code that you're using on your site. So let's talk about an example here, a switch. So I'm going to switch to my browser here. So you can see here that we have a switch component. I just went to the first website, the most popular website on Google when I looked for switch JavaScript component. This came up. So let's take a look at, from a mouse user, you know, you click on this, it works the way it's supposed to, right? This is how a switch component should work. You click on it, it turns off, switch on it again, and turns on. That's great. So let's talk about screen readers and keyboard accessibility. So if I actually used a keyboard, so you can see here my keyboard focus is on the toggle switch part. If I press tab, it goes forward one interactive element like it should. Press tab again, it goes to the next link. Click tab again, and here we are at the Savage link right over here. Now watch what happens when I press tab once more. Nothing happens. It doesn't go to the right place. I'm going to actually show you the experience with the screen reader. So I'm going to turn it on.
VoiceOver.
This is my screen reader. It's built into every Mac. If I could send you instructions about how to use this, but let's go on. We have a tab.
Visited link.
It announces that that's a link called toggle switch.
Link. Progress pie chart.
It announces that link.
Link. Checkbox.
It announces the name of each link.
Link.
But now if I press tab once more,
Leaving web content.
you can see that it actually goes into the browser Chrome. Keyboard focus never goes here. That's because this web component is not accessible. And this is the most popular, according to Google, toggle switch on the internet.
Leaving toolbar.
So let's talk about an accessible toggle switch. This is an Enable component. I have it right now. Keyboard focus is right now on this link.
Visited link. Using.
So here's the switch here. So it announces that. I press tab once more.
Speaker power off. Switch main.
So what it's telling me is that we've gone now into the main part of the website. There is a switch that is labeled speaker power, and it's off right now. If I press enter,
on speaker power switch,
it announces, the screen reader announces that something has changed, that the state of that component has changed. That's very important because if you're visually impaired or fully blind, you want to understand where you are in the document and what component you're on, and how to and understand how and when the state of that component changes.
VoiceOver off.
So how is that coded? So let's say the HTML is like this, which is the HTML of the Enable version of the switch. First thing we do is, well, in order to make sure that the component is keyboard accessible, we code it as a button because links and buttons automatically get keyboard focus. We make a role right over here, and we set the role to switch. That makes the screen reader announce that it's a switch when keyboard focus goes on it. If you want to have a label on that switch, which you should, because that'll announce what is the intent of that switch, what that switch is for, you make a label using the ARIA labeled by and using this ID. So the ARIA labeled by takes an ID, so these two are now connected, and that's how the screen reader knows what the label of that component is. The state of that component is actually announced with the ARIA checked equals true. So if the switch is on, ARIA checked is true, and if the switch is off, ARIA checked is false. You'll also notice that we put an ARIA described by, and it actually is connected to the actual visual label for the switch. And that's for older browsers because some browsers don't understand ARIA described by, although there are a few right now. But it's part of progressive enhancement, just like anything else on the web. We always use progressive enhancement. So I talked about switches. Let's talk about tabs. So I have another example over here. So this is the first example that I could find of a tab. And you'll see here it's W3C Schools, a very popular website. Unfortunately, they have a lot of bad best practices, not just for accessibility, but that's another talk. If I click on these guys, you can see that it works as intended with a mouse, which is fine. However, if I'm actually using a screen reader, this is what happens. And I'm just going to turn this on. And Alison Walden in her previous talk touched on this about how screen readers are sometimes, when things aren't coded well, things aren't announced correctly. So let's take a listen.
Voiceover on.
So my screen reader's on. I'm going to press tab.
Visited link.
It goes to the next link. I'm going to press tab once more.
Link. London.
It says that London is a link, which it's not. It's a button. It's actually a tab button. So number one, someone might click on that with their keyboard thinking it's a link, and it's not going to go anywhere, and they're going to get confused. Same thing with Paris.
Link.
Okay, that is a link, but it's not a link. It's supposed to be, it's reported as link, but it's actually a tab button. If I press enter, you'll hear that the screen reader doesn't announce anything. So a person who's going to go think that's a link and presses enter won't hear that, they've gone to another page, and they'll wonder what's wrong. This is not an accessible component. So how do we make an accessible component?
Visited.
So I'm going to show the enable version of a tabbed interface. So here I am. I'm going to tab to the first element. First of all, before I go on, I'm going to show that it works exactly the same way as the other one, except it looks nicer in my opinion. That's my opinion, of course. So I'm going to tab into this with my screen reader.
Voice.
And I'm going to tab in.
India Pale Ale IPA. Selected tab 1 of 3 main. Use arrow keys to choose tabs. Content will be displayed below.
So you'll hear that the screen reader actually says that it's in a tab 1 of 3. So I know as a visually impaired person, I have 3 tabs to cycle through, and I can use arrow keys to choose the tabs, and the content will be displayed below. So if I press the arrow keys as the instructions say.
Use selected tab 2 of 3. Imperial Stout. Selected tab 3 of 3.
It announces that and mentions that they're selected. And I could use my screen reader functionality to read the content below using, well, in VoiceOver's case, caps lock A.
Imperial Stout. Selected tab 3 of 3. Heading level 2. Imperial Stout. List 10 items. 1 toppling Goliath.
So I'm going to stop it right there. You get the point. This is an accessible experience. Also, if I turn off my screen reader, you'll notice that even without the screen reader, when I use a keyboard to tab into it, the instructions appear there. It doesn't appear when I just use a mouse, right? So those instructions aren't necessary for a mouse. They wouldn't understand what it meant, but they are useful for keyboard users. So there is an example of a great accessible component. So again, if I were to look at the code, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We set the roles right. We have a tab list. Each of the links within there is a tab. we have a roller presentation because that glues these two together. We make an ARIA describe by in each of the tabs and the tab list itself so that the instructions are read when someone tabs in to them. The ARIA owns, so this is the actual ID of the tab panel that this tab button is associated with. And we also make sure that ARIA selected is true on the tab that is actually highlighted or chosen with the keyboard. With JavaScript, in order to make the tabbing work, where when you tab into the components that in those instructions appear only when you tab in with the keyboard, I put a data element on there, and there's a JavaScript that actually activates that stuff. It also enables the left and right keys. And I use inside of enable is a library called accessibility.js that allows you to do this rather easily in only a few lines of code. So you might think, okay, accessibility is a developer task. It is not, because developers can make things accessible by coding it, but we have to be told how to make things accessible. We have to work with designers to make sure that, we understand how the keyboard functionality is supposed to work. If we don't work with designers to do this, we get a situation like this. This is actually Dolly Parton's, excuse my mistake, Dolly Parton's previous apartment. And it has a toilet in the middle of the bedroom. This is what happens when a contractor actually thinks, okay, well, I have to put a toilet someplace. They didn't tell me where to put it. This is where I put it. We need a designer to do this stuff. We have to work with the other streams in order to make sure accessibility works. And I encourage you to share this information with your designer and UX brethren to make sure our digital experiences are accessible. That's my talk. I will share the link www.useragentman.com/enable. That is the website where you can look at the examples. Thank you so much.